everybody. You know me, all of you. So Char Rodriguez, Professor of Family Medicine, Director of the FMER. And we are very, very happy to welcome in this FMER webinar series, Dr. Kate Rowland. So I will pass the word to immediately to Rowland Grad. He will introduce Kate and facilitate the sessions. But anyways, as usual, very happy that you are on the screen today. Thank you, Rowland.
Yeah, thank you, Charo. And thank you so much for listening when I suggested that we invite Kate. I stumbled across an article that won an award from the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine in the USA, I believe. And normally I'm not really excited about survey research in medical education, but this was different. This particular piece of research was so important, I thought, for us as family physicians, as educators in family medicine, and potentially as researchers too. So I just want to say that I'm delighted that Kate Rowland is with us today. She's an associate professor and vice chair for education in the Department of Family and Preventive Medicine at Rush University. I'm just going to read a little bit from her abbreviated bio here. She's a graduate of the University of Notre Dame and Rush Medical College. She completed training at the Advocate Illinois Masonic Family Medicine Residency and the University of Chicago Primary Care Clinical Scholars Fellowship, where she received her Master of Science in Health Studies. She has held leadership positions in student, resident, fellow, and faculty training. She's an associate medical editor for the American Academy of Family Physician FP Essentials series, and for a point of care resource that I use in my clinical practice called Essential Evidence Plus. So Dr. Rowland, actually I prefer Kate, co-chairs the Evidence-Based Medicine Collaborative of the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine, and is a knowledge assessment consultant for the American Board of Family Medicine, as well as a contributor to their National Journal Club. She currently serves as the chair of the board of the Illinois Academy of Family Physicians. Her areas of interest include longitudinal medical education, the translation of medical evidence to practice, and the future of evidence-based family medicine. Not trivial things. She and her husband, a physics professor, have 3 children. So like I say, she's managed to master medicine, marriage, and motherhood, the perfect trifecta. So Kate, thank you very much for joining us today. She'll take questions at the end of this talk, I believe, and you can put your questions in the chat, folks.
All right, thanks. So master all of those things may be a bit overblown. I've done them. Let's say that. All right, I'm going to get my timer going here. That's the calculator. And then I'll share some slides. But thanks. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm excited to be here today. I do have a terrible URI, so I apologize for muting to cough from time to time. And I hope it doesn't disrupt too much. I also had to come to work today to do this talk, which was a good idea anyways, but my children have the day off because it's election day in my home state. So they get they can't go to school because the schools are polling places. So they can't be in the schools. So they're all doing e-learning, which is a very very internet bandwidth heavy activity. So I was like, well, let's get out of here. So I'm glad to have a reason to leave the house, and my 3 teenagers, 17, 17, and 15 are all home. All right, so as hopefully you all know by now, I've just hidden my face and all of yours. So somebody please let me know if you can't hear me or can no longer see the slides or something else has gone wrong. I'm going to talk about what has happened to evidence-based medicine, and as Rowland was alluding to, some of the concerning trends in evidence-based family medicine. You've heard some of my essentially disclosures. I don't take money from anybody, but I do have some contracting positions, as you've heard. So these this is everyone that either gives me money or gives money to the people who employ me. I do want to give you my intellectual and I included today a geopolitical disclosure. So intellectually, this is how I see the world, and I choose to disclose this because it will become evident. And sometimes it's fun to take a different perspective, but you have to be a lifelong learner in family medicine. There's never a point where this is again my approach to the talk. Never a point where you can be like, well, this is it. I'm done. I've really got like everything that I need to know. Learning is a skill. You get better at it with time. You get better at it with practice. Patients are better served by physicians who know how to learn, who know how to access information. They know what kind of information they need. This is a new disclosure that I've started putting in. I think most people agree with this, but don't necessarily know that they think this. Not all information is good. It's long been true that not all information is useful or relevant, but not all information is good, and some information is intentionally bad. And again, I'll just say that's a lens that I'm using for the whole talk. And then finally, particularly relevant for today, I was born, raised, I became a doctor. I currently practice medicine in the US. Very US lens to this talk. You'll see it flares a little more sometimes than others. Um, okay, done with disclosures. Okay, what are we talking about today? So we're going to talk about the rise of evidence-based medicine. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on the historical context. It is relevant, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it before talking about sort of the more modern information. I'm going to talk about the features of the golden age of evidence-based medicine. So sort of the time when everybody was kind of on the same page. We kind of agreed on why is it important, what do we want from it, and how are we going to teach it. And then talk about the consequences of the lack of a sort of shared mental model. And that's in that third section, I'll talk about the research that we've done. It's St. Patrick's Day today. It was actually, I wrote this talk or this part of the talk a while ago, but the PowerPoint gave me that little shamrock icon. Just apparently they knew it's going to be. Okay, so for those of you who need to leave early or will have been doing other things by the end of the talk, here's the points I'm going to try and make today. Evidence-based medicine arose for a good reason, and those reasons persist. Again, I'm going to try and limit appropriately the amount of time I spend talking about historical context. The reason I'm choosing to spend any time on it at all is that I hope you see really clear parallels between where we were then and where we are now. Um, I'll leave it there. The golden age of evidence-based medicine, again, where everybody was kind of aligned about what we wanted out of it, how it was important. That time is behind us, and that is not a good thing. Today, we can show that evidence-based medicine is highly valued, but very weakly conceptualized. Again, there's not a sort of shared concept of what we mean by it, what we want from it, how we intend to use it in practice, and therefore how we intend to teach it. And most concerningly, evidence-based skills among US generalist physicians, family doctors, are waning. And I'm saying it's no more than a generation from becoming a lost skill, but in reality, that may have already happened, and we may not know it yet. So that's where we're going. Okay, so first point, EBM arose for a good reason, and those reasons persist today. I'm going to keep an eye on my time here. All right, let's go back in time. So this is before modern evidence. This is approximately a century ago. This is in the late 1910s, early 1920s. This specifically January 1920. This is at a time when medicine was sort of coalescing into a science. There was an era where medicine was not particularly science. It was not considered a particularly scientific pursuit. We talk a lot about the art of medicine. At one time, that was all it was. It was arts and sort of good intentions. Journals covered all kinds of things, news, politics, maybe some education, maybe something that they sort of thought you didn't already know. Um, but their science was mostly case studies and case series. So you can see here, this is a review of 33 cases of foreign bodies in the esophagus, bronchi, and larynx. And it is literally just a list of, I mean, a contextualized list of those 33 cases. You'll see this a lot if you look sort of back in time. But again, this sort of this era not a lot of science. This is 10-ish years later. There was a 12-page article about observations on an ovary stimulating hormone of the placenta. Just can't even imagine what there is to write 12 pages on it. Biochemistry, never my thing. And then you'll see a few pages later, this is another case report telling us about the care of an individual patient who had I believe, carcinoma on the roof of his mouth. And then there's another, you can see there another case report about a baby with hemorrhagic disease of the newborn. So this is what we had in the 20s and 30s, going back a little farther. Mostly case studies, not a lot um, of sort of hard science the way we think about it now. I did appreciate, meanwhile, in the USA, this is roughly the same time, 1926, I think this is. This is the predecessor of the New England Journal. We were trying to figure out, is margarine digestible? I assume they decided it was in the end because it's marketed everywhere. It's for sale everywhere nowadays, but that caught my eye and made me laugh. You can see later in the same edition, an article on just sort of a general information, essentially a narrative review, except there was no review. It was just like this guy's opinion about how to treat measles. And the answer included put boric acid in the eyes and rub some Vaseline over them, rinse the mouth with boric acid. It was just kind of, if you didn't learn this before, you can read about it now. So this is where we started. And these kinds of things are not necessarily unique to us. I did want to highlight too a couple of this is one Canadian journal, one US journal. Both of these journals struggled with, or they gave to their readers summaries of research studies found in other medical journals. So this is there were only about 200 to 250 journals being published at the time, and readers were still having trouble keeping up with the medical literature. And one reason that I'm spending any time at all talking about history is to make the point that there are no new problems in medicine, right? We have the same problems that we just revisit in different ways at different times throughout history. So a century ago, we were still trying to figure out how do we keep up with what's going on in other journals. Okay, this is the part where I'm going to talk a little bit faster because I just wrote a few too many slides here to make a relatively straightforward point. So the point I put in big letters at the top, which is that evidence-based medicine arose from a proliferation of evidence that happened as the result of sort of a 50-year change in how we perceived science, essentially the combination of science and medicine. And that in turn arose from demand, public demand for increased science and medicine. Again, there's some cultural and societal shifts that obviously happened over that same time that trickled over into medicine. But that was met by an increase in funding, in part from, sort of capitalist forces. And that was checked in part by regulation. And we'll talk about how that regulation sort of affected and ultimately more or less led directly to this sort of big increase that we had in the medical literature. So starting around that same time that we were just looking at, we had World War I. And this was actually really surprisingly foundational to modern evidence in a way that we don't necessarily think about. So World War I, of course, coincided with the influenza pandemic. And the combination of those two things led to something that in the US was really very distressing to the general public, which was that the majority of, this should say, World War mortality. Most of the majority of people who died during the war died not from combat, but from disease. And that had been true in other wars as well. But some of it was that there was a particularly high mortality rate during the war. And some of it was, so there were just a lot of people who had died. And some of it was that some of these deaths happened in the US. So people who they hadn't even left, for the war theaters and were dying from disease. And the US public was sort of like, is there anything that we can do? Is there a better way? I didn't think it was really, and the answer, of course, was yes. The US had just chosen other things. They were able to say yes, and they were able to see some contrast in part because the Canadian war casualties looked so much different. Canada, of course, had more time in the war than the US did. I mean, joined the war earlier. But their rate of infectious disease deaths, proportion of infectious disease deaths was significantly lower than the US was. And these were for sort of predictable reasons. They had a much stronger vaccine requirement and much stronger health and hygiene requirements. And so their rate of deaths from the influenza pandemic were lower. Um, and they saw better recovery from other kinds of infectious diseases. So this was one of the first times when the U.S. public sort of said there has to be a better way, and that led that sort of experience coming out of the First World War, the experience with the influenza pandemic led more or less directly to the creation of the National Institutes for Health. And that ultimately is going to become a significant government funder for many years of research science. Um, it took them a few years to actually get that converted into law, to get everything stood up. But that was followed fairly quickly by some significant regulation of food and drugs, essentially giving the FDA some teeth. Um, just as the sort of roaring 20s were a significant time for banking, for lots of industry, it was also a pretty significant time for the medical and pharmaceutical industries. A lot of patent medicines came up, were widely marketed, and there was one elixir of sulfanilamide that was sold as a regular pharmaceutical, prescribed by doctors, dispensed by pharmacies. But what the pharmaceutical company had not necessarily mentioned was that they had used ethylene glycol to dissolve the medication in, leading to hundreds of deaths around the country. And so the government said, well, obviously mass panic, mass fear, and that led to the sort of FDA, the creation of the modern FDA. It had existed, and now it had a little bit more teeth. So there was demand for this kind of medication, demand for, the for doctors to be able to use drugs like this, for pharmacies to have them, but there was also demand for them to be safe, and for more information about whether they were effective. Uh, Mass production of penicillin and other medications. So penicillin discovered in the mid 20s. In the 40s is when we start to get mass production of again penicillin and sulfonamides, along with other medications. And this is a time when, again, just a few years earlier, we'd had widespread unregulated medications, and now we have them everywhere. And so not until 10 years later did we actually have, in the US, a better sense of, can anyone just go in and ask for some penicillin, or are there medications that are truly reserved for physician prescription versus patients being able to just sort of go to the pharmacy and ask for them? So the concept of what's sold over the counter and why was not really clear, and doesn't become really clear for a number of years. And so things that remained over the counter in this era, it included things that contained hadacol in the middle, essentially just alcohol with some vitamins in it, very popular. Sold like crazy, 12% alcohol. And you could, walk in, it was over the counter. You could get 8 ounces of hadacol. That was, again, mostly just alcohol, but sold as a medication. Paregoric was a tincture of morphine, also sold initially as an over-the-counter medication. Pink pills, you could take an overdose of iron just by taking a couple of pink pills, and children did because they obviously look very much like candy. So there were a number of things that were available over the counter, including in many countries thalidomide. And thalidomide, many of us know the story. But was sold in some countries as a prescription, in other countries over the counter, but was just simply not known to be dangerous at the time that it was brought to market. Had never been tested, just nobody was particularly curious, nobody wanted to know. I'll note that this is a modern picture of thalidomide, obviously not a historic one. But again, this is an era where there was tremendous demand for it. And if anybody has read, there's a book about thalidomide that explains sort of it was used initially as a sedative, why there was so much demand for sedatives at the time, and why the people who took it were so vulnerable to it. Um, but huge demand for over-the-counter medications, for pharmaceuticals in general, but not yet the regulatory infrastructure to be able to say, is this effective? Is this safe? So that comes in the next couple of years. So thalidomide comes on the market in 1957. Again, in some places over the counter, in other places sold only as a prescription. And in a response in the US, where again it never did come to market, in 1962, the Kefauver-Harris amendments were passed. And those were the ones where the US FDA said, if you want to sell a medication, you have to prove to us that it's effective. Uh, so the pharmaceutical companies responded by saying, essentially, but do we really? Do we really have to do this? So 1970 is about where things take a turn for the sort of put some teeth into the Harris-Kefauver Act. Um, Penalba is the name of a medication that was a combination of tetracycline and novabiocin. It was made by the Upjohn company, developed in the 50s, incredibly successful. Doctors prescribed a lot of it, patients took a lot of it, and incredibly dangerous. About 1 in 5 patients had a significant allergic reaction to it. The combination with novabiocin actually made the tetracycline less effective, and there were multiple deaths associated with it. So the FDA says to Upjohn, you have to remove this from the market. It's dangerous and not effective. And Upjohn says, well, we're not going to. Listen, doctors prescribe this. It is financially very successful. We think that there's no reason to remove it from the market. If it was really dangerous, doctors would know and they would stop prescribing it. So the Upjohn versus Finch ruling was the one, it was a U.S. Court of Appeals ruling that said a doctor's opinion is actually not enough to establish safety and efficacy. So 1970 is when it really sort of, again, put teeth to the Kefauver-Harris Act saying all new and existing medications require 2 scientific drug efficacy studies. So I think that's enough to hopefully see where we've gone with all of this. That, again, over about 40 years, going from mostly, case studies and case series to if a pharmaceutical company wants to sell a medication to doctors, and they do, they need to be able to show 2 scientific drug efficacy studies. And at the time, they didn't need to be published. Actually, they still don't. But there was incentive to put those into medical journals. And you can see this is a graph of time on the bottom axis and number of citations indexed in Medline by year. You can see that right around 1962, with the first Kefauver-Harris Act, you see a bit of an uptick in slope of this line. And actually, you see it another couple of times when it slopes upward pretty sharply. Some of these correspond to changes in funding from the NIH, and others of them don't have any particular change in output that we could. This is just artifact. I should have taken that out. But that first uptick in slope does correspond to that point in time. So historically, again, where a lot of this explosion of scientific evidence that happens right around the time that evidence-based medicine starts to become a thing, so to speak, came because patients were saying, look, we want better medications, we want treatment, we want to know that our loved ones are going to be well. And that demand was met by people who you could say it's their job. It's the job of a pharmaceutical company. It's the job of the sort of medical industry to create those treatments, create better diagnostic pathways. It was accelerated by different kinds of funding, some of it private, some of it public, and balanced by regulation. To some extent, and the regulation, you can see historically, is often chasing the demand and the funding. And this is the point where you should be like, okay, so there's certain parallels to where we are now, where there's tremendous demand, and there's, quite a bit of funding of various kinds, and we're in a point where regulation is really, chasing. It's coming somewhat after, um, the rest of that. So the second point that I'm about to transition into is again that the golden age, where everyone was sort of on the same page of evidence-based medicine, is behind us. And today we're in a state where EBM is very valued, but not conceptualized enough to make it easy to study, easy to teach, easy to disseminate. This graph we just saw. Um, so around the time when EBM becomes sort of brought together as a field, is around the time actually sort of this plateau and then emerging into that sort of sharp spike upward. This is a photograph, 1968. There were big protests in my hometown of Chicago, around the Democratic National Convention. And this is an era where many of the scions of science-based or evidence-based medicine, this is the era where they grew up. Sort of end of the apprenticeship model. These were not young physicians who were going to, sort of nod along when, the eminence in the room just had something good to say. So those two things together, big increase in medical knowledge, huge number of studies, and an end of sort of the passive acceptance of authority. Just a huge number of, again, piles of articles, piles of journals, and a lot of hard work. And I don't want to gloss over this too much. It wasn't like everybody just kind of came together and immediately was like, okay, so we know what we're going to do here. There were a number of sort of different groups working on what's the best way to identify the good information from the less good information, the relevant stuff from the less relevant stuff, the high quality from the less high quality, the intellectually conflicted from the or financially conflicted from the less so. So different groups working on this all at the same time. But again, a generally speaking shared mental model of what they were looking for, which was good information to apply to the care of an individual patient. And that sort of held for roughly 15 to 20 years, of, again, a number of different groups all working on the same idea. Widely, shared across medicine, and essentially every, family medicine residency program, at least, and most other kinds of specialties would have an EBM curriculum, would have an EBM component to their teaching. And in this era, many, many practicing physicians went one of two ways. Rowland, this is slide 32. They either said, this is destroying my relationship with my patients and my autonomy. Don't tell me what to do. Or they said, I already do this. Of course, I practice evidence-based medicine. Of course, I already have the ability to find good information and do it. There were a small group of people who were like, I'm curious about this. I can accept that maybe I need to know more about it, and I could stand to improve my skills in this area. But there was not a lot of overlap in the area where people who were like, there's room to grow, and I don't see this as a significant threat. And this was a difficult, to some extent, to be honest, we continue to live in these two sort of dichotomous realms. Give me just a sec while I. All right. This is one of my concerning slides about when I say that the golden age, when we have that shared model when everybody understands or has a common sense of what evidence-based medicine means. This is one of the reasons that I think that that's true. So these are Medline citations just for the mesh term. So these are papers, projects that are about evidence-based medicine, not using the term evidence-based medicine. And you can see that we did, in fact, kind of have a peak and that it's kind of coming down. I was interested to see the peak actually maybe made it a little bit later than I was expecting it to, but definitely seemed to come down. I was interested to see that it appeared to be going back up. And again, in the US, that time frame was maybe exactly when you'd expect it to go back up. Again, sort of in the current culture that we're in. But this is not something that people are spending their time writing about. They're not, writing papers about how do we do this well? How do we incorporate these into our practice, into our clinical systems? This is something that has, it's crested and is falling. And you can see it's actually falling. It's falling quite sharply. For something that was, kind of at a decent place for a while. And I'll contrast that with the idea that everybody kind of fell into the I already do this camp. That it was like, yeah, evidence-based, of course. I already know how to do this. Um, so this is evidence-based medicine, a keyword search. So not a mesh term, but a keyword search. How often do we just say evidence-based? Without a sense of like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be an evidence-based concept or an evidence-based guideline or to truly incorporate evidence into whatever it is that you're talking about? And that you can see by contrast, this again is artifact. I'm not sure how somebody got a publication date of 2 years from now. But you can see this skyrockets. This has gone steadily up. Not a single year, except for our incomplete year there, where this has gone backwards. And so that it really does reinforce the idea that we believe in this, like we think it's important, and I'll show you some additional information in a little bit that shows this also. And I'll say these are really back of the cuff. This is not data that I intend to publish. This is, me sort of being like, I'm sort of confirming a hypothesis here, but it very much confirms or supports perceptions that I have and some other data that I'll show you in just a minute. These are the two graphs on the same scale. Again, not surprising that a keyword would be present in the literature far more, but does give you a sense of how much more. And again, just simple counts that the keyword is really rising fast and really orders of magnitude different than that mesh term ever was. Although they kind of start out not far apart, and then it just becomes, again, a totally different order of magnitude. Touched on this, but want to sort of touch on it again. What are the consequences of, having all of these groups who sort of say this is important, but we don't really have a shared concept of what it means? These are three important U.S. guideline issuing bodies: the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the American College of Physicians, and the American College of Cardiology / the American Heart Association. So these are, again, groups that issue clinically important guidelines. When they speak, people listen. And the way that they appraise evidence and the way that they walk evidence into a clinical recommendation is wildly different. Excuse me. You can see they don't even use the same words. Or when they use the same words, they don't mean the same thing. So if you are a generalist physician like me, and you're reading all of these different guidelines and trying to apply them to your practice, sometimes not unreasonably in the same patient, you have to be familiar with the ACA's or the ACC's unique way of appraising an individual study and understanding that what they mean by a level B/NR is that the same as very low, moderate, if you're talking about a patient to whom an ACOG recommendation also applies. So this is the problem, is that it creates barriers to care if you have somebody who really wants to understand on even a slightly deeper level a recommendation from a guideline issuing body. If somebody has a question, if somebody says, I'm not sure I want to do that, can you tell me more about how likely I am to benefit? If you want to be able to do that, it's very difficult to walk between different groups. And I just picked three. There's dozens of them that are potentially out there. So this is one of the issues that arises when we don't have, again, that sort of shared model of what does it mean to use evidence in practice. Okay, let me tell you about the research study, the thing that Rowland actually asked me to talk about when he invited me to come and talk today. So evidence-based skills among U.S. family physicians are waning. That I can show you in a second. No more than a generation, I'll show you why I think that's true, from becoming specialized skills rather than universal skills. And it's possible that that transition has already happened. First, I'll say it's clear these are required. The ACGME, uh, the program requirements for family medicine residents, for residencies, it's clear that they have to be able to appraise scientific evidence. They have to have a scholarly approach to evidence-based care. They have to do what is essentially the equivalent of journal club, regularly scheduled forum for the analysis of evidence. And program directors have told us that it's valued. I've said that repeatedly. I showed you some other data that seems like that's true. But they tell us, this was a different survey, they tell us it's routine, there's a high level of acceptance. Family medicine program directors, the same group of people, tell us that it's valuable. It's accepted, it's routine. 90% of the program directors in the survey that we did a couple years ago, we asked, do you accept the process and outcome? They say yes. They agree or strongly agree with that statement. So when done, they say, yeah, it's not like they just dismiss it out of hand. They believe in it. So required, it's valued, it's necessary. That should easily translate to some kind of action. But what we actually found when we asked them what percentage, the survey was sent to program directors only. So all of this is program director report. Having an evidence-based medicine curriculum, almost everyone. So 92.5% say, yeah, we have a curriculum. And it's like, okay, well, that's solid. You say you value this, it's required. So the correct answer on a survey is, yeah, we do this. And then everything else was essentially like, all of the rest of the items that we had on this survey were less good than that. We asked, can 50% of your current residents identify a significant error in an original research article? So we consider that to be sort of a baseline critical appraisal kind of skill. So many journal clubs teach critical appraisal of original research. Less than a quarter of program directors told us that half of their current residents could do that. And that a significant proportion said that only one or none of them would be able to do that. We obviously are open to using lots of point of care tools. UpToDate is a very common one, or was at the time we did the survey. We asked, can you excuse me, essentially, can you critically appraise your point of care tools? Would they notice if there was a significant omission, something that just didn't make sense in an UpToDate article? This was actually worse. They said no, that 16% said 50% or more of their residents would be able to identify an error in UpToDate. We rely heavily on narrative reviews, just a quick overview of a common topic. As a medical journal editor, soliciting those kinds of narrative reviews, I asked this question in part because we've noticed a big change, a change for the worse in the ability to get good authors. So we asked this question also. I wasn't necessarily surprised by this, but it is concerning, just in terms of who is going to write these in the future, since they are going to want to continue to read them. Um, and I'm not sure that AI is necessarily the right answer. Somebody is going to have to read them. Somebody's going to have to edit them in the future. Uh, we poked a little bit at who, asking that exact same question, who is doing this in the future? 25% of the program directors said that they actually didn't have a faculty member in charge of the curriculum. 92% said they had one. 1 in 4 said no specific person is actually running it, which to me is essentially the same as there is no curriculum. Like there may be things that the residents do, but there's nobody overseeing that aspect of the curriculum. We looked at years of experience, and this was one of our hypotheses going in, and I'll show you in just a second. Um, so relatively few of the faculty were new to the residency. You'll see again the most common number of years of experience is there was no person, just a ghost running the whole show. And then the next was very experienced. 16 years or more, our highest category of experience. This again idea of one of the things that we noticed, one of the things that we had observed that led us to do the study in the first place, we're part of this evidence-based medicine collaborative as part of the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine. There were about 200 members, 193 members, and we searched the records of the collaborative. We found that about half of the collaborative members had some kind of senior role. They were at least had a senior faculty appointment or above. They were chairs, vice chairs, or had a dean role, something that would indicate that they were senior faculty, which is concerning. And certainly for a group that skews a little bit young, it has a ton of resources for new faculty, new to the role, new brand new faculty position kinds of positions. So it is concerning that not only are those positions not being filled in residency programs, but that it does seem like they're being given to people who are already a little bit older in their careers, a little bit on in their careers. So that's what led us to be concerned, among other things, that the skills may be waning, and that they are strongest in people who are a little bit more senior. And the risk there, of course, is that they're going to be lost among the newer generations of family physicians. Again, some concern that may have already happened, and that we're getting down to just a very small group of people with specialized skills. We're going to get the couple dozen, if that, of family physicians every year who are really interested in this, instead of it being a universal skill, taught as expected to all family physicians by the ACGME. So. Leading us to this, who will teach this required, valued, necessary skill, and will learners understand the incentives to learn it? And that this is a quote from someone I work with. That there's no substitute for knowing things. That learning things is a skill, and knowing things is the consequence of that skill. But I think that's it. Oh, this is an aside. I guess I'll just cover this very quickly. Information mastery is one unique aspect of EBM. It will be influenced by emerging technologies. I do think it's interesting. I think it's the end of the talk, so it's the last historic point I make. This is something that we have been saying since the very early part of the internet era, that the way that we acquire information should be influenced by emerging technology. We should make it as easy as possible. And that is something that should be ongoing, but we should be good at it. We should know, the drawbacks of any, we should be able to critically appraise up to date or open evidence. But we should be able to use those tools effectively. And yes, it will be influenced by emerging technology, and there's no problem with that, as long as we're good at it. I think that's it. And I'm gonna stop sharing and
Great. Thank you so much.
see. Okay.
Food for thought. Thank you so much. I'm looking at you on my iPad, so I don't have the ability to see who puts their hands up very easily.
Okay.
But
So,
I can tell you, Roland, Michelle
yeah.
has raised her hand and Robert has a comment in the chat. Okay.
So we'll go in that order. Okay, Michelle first, right?
Yeah.
Sure, thanks. Hi, Kate. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. It was really great. I just want to point out, though, if when you're showing the trajectory of evidence-based medicine, I think it would be important to point out the contributions of Archie Cochrane. In 1993, the Cochrane collaboration was established, and that, had a huge impact on evidence-based medicine. And that also contributed a lot to the evidence-based medicine, trajectory going upwards from 1995, as you show on your graph. So that was just a comment. Thanks.
Yeah, you'll note a lot of omissions. So I omitted the whole middle part about all of the fun parts of evidence-based medicine, um, which I would love to do another time. No, again, it was not intended to be a history talk, and I apologize for actually taking so much time to talk about the history part of it. But yes, so the things that actually that give us like the modern curricula of again, all of the critical appraisal, the things that we actually, and those things are meant to change. So I'm not saying that we should be teaching it exactly the way that we did originally, or that we should be using the same tools, or that things are meant to evolve. But yes, all of the actual like meat of it, I think I distilled to 3 slides, which I apologize for.
There is no need for apology. Okay.
Going to Robert next.
Yes, Robin. Robert, please.
Robert Carlin.
I guess I can say aloud what I wrote in the chat. So thank you for the talk. I'm involved in our residency program at McGill. So this is a topic dear to my heart. And as you pointed out, I guess over the 30 years of my professional practice, the way that we access information or the tools that we use has changed a lot. When I was in residency, certainly we were explicitly taught skills around evidence-based medicine and reviewing the primary literature. And then there was this shift to kind of using more guidelines and having digested material as kind of an applied science. And now what I really see are learners adopting, like, as you mentioned it on the last slide, like open evidence and really kind of a bit of a black box. So I'm just wondering how you approach that newer technology where there's kind of it's a bit harder to make a judgment when you can't really see what's going on in terms of the logic behind making recommendations for clinical care and some of these newer generative AI tools.
Yeah. So I don't have an initial no response to certainly playing around with them, looking at them, seeing what they're good for and what they're not. But I'm also I'm a cynical soul. And so I do want to know what's inside the black box? What happens if we poke the black box? Can you really, is there a lid to the black, I want to know, can we break it? One of the things that gets me about open evidence is that you have no idea what it's trained on. They won't tell you what journals are in there and what's not. And every once in a while you can find there's an article that I know exists and I'm like, well, what about this one? And it'll just, spit you back like a, beep blurb, we are trained on whatever, on a comprehensive list of, and it's just like, okay, so you don't have that one in your database. Okay. But it will not tell you. So it is kind of concerning, to sort of be like, oh, okay, well, there's things that that one's willful, they willfully will not include those. They don't have I don't know, I assume some kind of kickback, but that's again, my cynical nature. But the idea that the tools exist and it is okay to use them, but it's your responsibility. If you're a person who's caring for patients, it's your responsibility to know what the limits are, of the tool's reliability. My concern is that just like we did with the internet, right? When we're like, oh, it's so cool to just Google stuff and it's so fast, that we're willing to accept a certain amount of risk that it's going to be wrong because it's so fast and easy. But right now we don't clearly have like what that risk is, like well enunciated. That makes me like as a profession, that makes me anxious.
Yeah. Can I respond to that? I don't know if there's someone in the queue, Charo.
Mark Roper.
Yeah, just a quick question. Can we use AI tools to critique an article now? Just saying, has anyone ever tried that? Or I'm sure Rowland's tried that.
No, I haven't. I mean, I use tools myself that are pre-appraised in the sense that, I subscribe to the belief that there's too much primary research for a doctor to properly evaluate on their own. And so I tend to use good quality, what I think are good quality guidelines, and sometimes pre-appraised tools in my clinical practice. I don't know what you think of that, Kate.
Yeah, so to answer Mark's question first, yeah, you should try it. You should try it and see what you think. I think they talk too much. They don't give me the information that I actually want. And they don't learn. So like ChatGPT will never, you can't give it feedback and it won't do it better for you the next time. That's just not the way it works.
Really?
But some people love it. So, your mileage may vary. Again, like this is what I do for a living. So I'm pretty quick at reading an article and sort of picking out the parts that I like. But I can definitely see how like, some of the students and residents that I teach where like it's a lot of work for them to get that, article to pick out the parts that they are most interested in. That it could be, like they just get it distilled to, an info poem style summary really quick, that's good for them. That saves them a lot of time. And sorry, Roland, I never forgot your question.
I mean,
Taking
I
notes.
was sort of thinking, there's so much we could talk about, but we
Oh,
only
good
have a few
notes.
minutes.
Sorry.
We only have a few minutes left, and I was thinking about the finding in your research, where you said, I think you found that, a lot of people believe they're already doing evidence-based medicine. But if you ask those people who think they're doing it, like, okay, so what type of evidence do you think is needed, for example, to believe that an intervention like a screening test should be applied in primary care, should be adopted? What type of evidence do you think we need in order to feel confident that we're doing the right thing for our patients? My hypothesis is very few people would actually be able to elaborate in a very sophisticated way on that question. So even though they think they're doing it, they're not. And that might be an interesting study. I don't know that we need to prove that point, if that would help our field at all. But I'm given very little time to teach evidence-based medicine at the medical school. I'm responsible for teaching EBM at McGill, and I'm given like 7 hours plus a 1 hour workshop on point of care tools, and that's it in the 4 years of medical school. They get one more hour in fourth year before they go into residency, but it's really quite minimal. I don't see us being able to train people very effectively in that way. And in the residency, there's no structured EBM teaching in the residency either that I know of at McGill. And that's sort of gets at your point that it's like we think we're all great and we think we're doing it, but in reality, it ain't so good. So that's just a comment more than a question, I guess. Yeah. I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody disagrees with me here, but that's how I see it.
May I say something, Roland?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I was wondering, okay, I'm a qualitative researcher, Kate, but I have a background in biomedical, epidemiological research as well. So this battle among research paradigms is not my business whatsoever, okay? So, and I think that, as you have said, a good clinician need to continuous learning and try to combine for the patient that is in front of all the knowledge available, the good knowledge available. And one is the scientific knowledge, but there are other types of knowledge as well that can play a role. This is one thing. The other thing is that maybe the way that evidence-based medicine in the golden age presents itself, it was very I don't know if it's the good word, totalitarian, is the way to go, and other. So it was a resistance in academia for sure, in the literature, but maybe also the way that how a practitioner who is not a researcher can apply the best evidence is too heavy. And a third aspect is I don't know in your university, but here at McGill, medical students is pass and fail. There is no graduation according to the grades. So the way, and usually all guys who reach the medical school have very, very good CGPA scores and grades, etc. So the way that they are now trying to demark themselves for the mass of students that are very good is to do research. But what I see is that the research that they do is very low quality. So I think, I don't know if there is another way to get into, because as you said, I think the encouraging message in your presentation is that there is, people value scientific knowledge, practitioners value, scholars, but maybe the way that has been presented at the more political level and the way that is substantiated for practitioners should change. And maybe it's more an encouraging message that maybe technology, AI could help. I'm very skeptical for the moment regarding that, because I'm not an expert, but it is clear that these platforms still hallucinate a lot. So you cannot rely 100% on that. But maybe in the future, they will be better than they are. Anyways, there are many different elements, but I think the good news from your presentation is that people value, in our context, scientific knowledge, but it's the way that is presented itself and how is materialized in the practice that maybe we should be more creative in the way that they will accept. I don't know. You are the expert.
No, I'm put on slide one. I'm always learning. I'll just say, I know we got to wrap up, but I agree with you that I think some of the initial pushback did come from the fact that some of the sort of early, the early folks in the field were a bit dogmatic about this is the way it is, this is the way you do it, there's right and wrong, and that's it. But I also think, again, there was a certain amount of the sort of lingering effects that people felt very again, they felt like this is successful, this works, this is valuable, and just trying to figure out, where's the nowadays that we have more science than ever, a lot of it bad. How do we take the parts that did work before it's kind of too late? And I think that's about, where we are. So, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Roland, because
I love that last sentence. How do we keep the parts that did work and build on that? So it gives us a lot of food and a lot of challenge for the future. So thank you so much, Kate, for taking the time to put this talk together and sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you. This has been
Thank you
fun.
so much. Really hope that we will have the opportunity to keep collaborating in the future. Thank you again, and thank you everybody for staying
Thank you all.
on the screen. Take care, guys. See you at the next FMER